welcome back from lunch and welcome to this panel. I want to thank everybody for being here for this panel, especially our panelists. We're going to be talking about place-based initiatives around housing, community investment, job creation, and family support in this broader discussion about eliminating poverty. My name is Karen Bell. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Social, Behavioral, and Population Sciences here at the Tulane University School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine, and I will serve as your moderator for this panel. I just want to make sure that we're all clear on how the panel is set up. We're going to have it in 3 parts. First, our panelists will discuss what they do and the place-based initiatives that they lead. Then we will have a discussion on things like policy, funding, specifically next steps in this area. And then lastly, we will open up the discussion to questions from the audience. And so audience, you can put questions in the chat. You can wait until that time to raise your hand or speak up or however you want to communicate. So with that, let me introduce our panelists. First, I'm going to give introductions, and then I'm going to start asking questions. First, we have Dr. John M. Wallace Jr., who is the Vice Provost for Faculty Diversity and Development and the David E. Epperson Endowed Chair and Professor at the University of Pittsburgh. He is the principal investigator of the University of Pittsburgh Center on Race and Social Problems, which is an integrated program of research, teaching, and service designed to investigate and ameliorate social problems that disproportionately impact economically disadvantaged African American communities. He is also senior pastor of the Bible Center Church in the Homewood community of Pittsburgh. He is the co-founder and board president of the Homewood Children's Village, the board president of Homewood's leading community organization, community organizing entity, Operation Better Block, and the founder of the Oasis Project, which is the Community and Economic Development Division of the Bible Center Church. Next, we have Mr. Jacob Peters. He is the Director of Operations for the Bayou District Foundation in New Orleans here. Mr. Peters oversees a purpose-built community project in operation at Columbia Park, which is located in the Gentilly neighborhood of New Orleans. The purpose-built community at Columbia Park is funded by the Bayou District Foundation. And then last but not least, we have Mr. Julius E. Kimbrough, Jr. He was formerly executive director of the Crescent City Community Land Trust here in New Orleans, and he is now in a position working on finance where he focuses on securing funding for similar projects across the city. So I want to say thank you all for joining us. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. And first, I just want to start with Dr. Wallace. Can you tell us about what you do, sort of answering the how and the why of your work?
Sure. So again, excited to be here. My why is probably rooted in my own childhood and the fact that my great-grandfather was actually born enslaved. And my grandfather worked at U.S. Steel for 42 years and was told that because he was Black, he could not be a supervisor. And so those realities kind of shape and frame my own experiences and interests. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a neighborhood called Homewood that I left in 1983, never to come back, and came back. And so my faith is really the driver. And there are a couple of actually biblical verses, and so I'll be honest about kind of where the drive is. There's 2 passages. One, Matthew chapter 6, verse 10. You may know it as a part of what people call the Lord's Prayer. It simply says, "Your kingdom come." And then it clarifies what that means. It means your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so the vision and mission that drives my work really is the idea of making earth more like heaven, or here like there. And then there's another passage, Jeremiah 29:7 says, "Seek the peace and the prosperity of the city and pray for it." And then because as the city does well, you do well as well. And so the work that we do in Homewood, both in partnership with the university and independently as our faith community, is what I call withintrification. It is the community being transformed from within. And so in partnership with community-based organizations, in partnership with the faith community, to bring about the transformation of the community through purchasing and the adaptive reuse of vacant abandoned properties, through encouraging and supporting policy, but primarily through the areas of education, employment, entrepreneurship, and the built environment. And so we really seek to move forward economic mobility by equipping people educationally, by providing jobs, and by working with entrepreneurs to create businesses, build wealth, and transform the community, as well as the acquisition of vacant abandoned properties and the adaptive reuse of those properties for the benefit of the community. So currently we have several businesses called one is Own Our Own, which is our entrepreneurship academy, Oasis Community Kitchen, which is a business incubator kitchen where we work with food-based entrepreneurs to help them launch their businesses. The Makers Clubhouse, which is our educational work focused on STEAM, education, science, technology. Our A is agriculture. And so we work with aquaponics, hydroponics, as well as traditional growing. Oasis Farm and Fishery, which is our urban farm. Oasis Property Management and Maintenance, which is a cleaning and maintenance business. Oasis Transportation, which was designed to address the issue that many of our children live in communities and walk through those communities in the cold and the dark. Here in Pittsburgh is much colder than down there. And so the babies walking during the wintertime and again, when it gets dark, that was unacceptable. So we started a transportation company to address that issue. And so really about the business of building businesses, but more importantly, building people and equipping them to be active as transformers of their own spaces and places, hence the idea of withintrification.
Thank you. I know that you coined that term with gentrification, but it really resonates with me. Yeah, it really resonates with me. And I'm definitely gonna come back to that in our discussion. I would like to ask Mr. Peters to tell us a little bit about your work, your why, your how, specifically thinking about housing.
No, why is really easy. My senior year of high school was Hurricane Katrina. Frankly, I witnessed everything that took place in the city and was evacuated and came back and wanted to be a part of bringing back New Orleans. Now, so that's the easy answer. The how is the Bayou District Foundation's mission is to break the cycle of intergenerational poverty through a holistic place-based model. Really looking and taking that word holistic and really stretching it to its full thrust. So we're looking at affordable housing, educational pipelines, grocery retail, healthcare, and how every aspect of your built environment affects your social determinants of health. And then layering programs through that, if it's maternal and child health, if it's community navigation programs, making sure people are in getting the right services they need, or just getting them opportunities that are presented to the foundation. And then also looking at sort of your mental health, physical health, and how your environment affects all of it. So we work really on a 53-acre site in Gentilly, which was a former housing project. And we're presented the opportunity to really rebuild in a way where we could do it at a high quality, and just that's about it.
Thank you. What I heard in common between both of these, and I'm sure we'll hear throughout our conversation, is that there's so many things to address, and how can we manage that? I really would like to discuss that. But Mr. Kimbrough, could you please tell us what you do, your why and your how?
Sure, thank you, and I appreciate the invitation. So I'm sitting home to do this panel, and I'm about 2 blocks from St. Bernard Avenue, where I grew up, and I still live in the neighborhood where I grew up, and I'm very happy to be able to do so and proud. And when I was about 20, also living on St. Bernard Avenue, I woke up one day and, St. Bernard Avenue is terribly important. I went to Corpus Christi. I went to Catholic school on St. Bernard Avenue, right? And while I'm not a practicing person, I think I got very strong ideas about right and wrong, and more importantly, fairness. And I think I realized around 20 that what I saw in my community just wasn't fair relative to other communities. And that's kind of inspired my work, is a desire to achieve fairness and maybe equitability. And in more recent years, I've come to understand the notions of equity better. But sticking with that idea of fairness, I kind of bounced around professionally. I've studied the economy of New Orleans. I've been a program officer with a major foundation. I've been an urban planner. I've been an investment banker. And the formative years of my life were also Katrina professionally. I worked for a bank, a Black-owned bank here in New Orleans called Liberty, and I managed our community development and economic development lending programs. So subsidized finance to projects that didn't warrant market rate financing or couldn't get market rate financing in traditional sources. And I had the privilege to do every kind of subsidy, from single family, soft second mortgages through the Sanger 930 Poydras, where Johnny Sanchez is located on Poydras Avenue. Also financed the Job Services Center. I'm forgetting who it belongs to, at Norman C. Francis and Tulane. And then I joined Crescent City Community Land Trust, which is a CDC that focuses on permanent affordability here in New Orleans. And when that epiphany I had when I was 20, I said to myself, I want to run a community development corporation. And I didn't know what that meant. I just knew I wanted to do it. I knew I wanted to save my city, save my community, whatever those phrases meant to a 20-year-old. And my time at Liberty was great. I was very pleased to work with a Black-owned firm and help African Americans on average do things they could not otherwise, and it was important to me. But I also felt something was missing, and the work at Liberty was hands-off. I was an intermediary, and I was not hands-on, and I wanted to get closer to the people that I wanted to serve and wanted to help, and that's what led me to Crescent City. And Crescent City is about permanent affordability. That's nothing but another alternative to the traditional forms of affordability for single-family housing, apartments, commercial spaces that we all know. And the traditional community land trust model, the three drivers of it are: you create the permanently affordable unit, you make certain the right people are living in the affordable unit or occupying it, so qualifying them in terms of their income, and then helping those families or small businesses stay in those units. And when a couple of years in, I realized that might work in other parts of the country, in homogenous communities or wealthy communities, those three sort of concepts, but I realized it wasn't going to work in a poor Black environment, which is the people I serve and try to work with historically. And so I developed this notion of stewardship that is more proactive. And it says that my theory is that the real estate is just a conduit. And so you asked why. The housing is a basic need, real estate is a basic need if you want to be in business. And so you need space. And the basic premise of affordable space, housing or commercial, is that we're taking tax dollars, subsidy dollars, philanthropic dollars, and we're pushing down the market rate of those spaces, whether it's for sale or for rent, to meet the below average income of the people who are using that space, or the business that's struggling in that space, the startup, or the business that doesn't have access to broader markets for some reason, or again, a person who makes below average and can't afford market rate real estate. And once we, whoever we are, help those families or small businesses get into real estate that they can afford, what then? They're still below income. They're still struggling as small business operators to break into bigger markets. And that's where this idea of stewardship that I I worked with that Crescent City came to be. It says that we have to do more than just house or provide space that's affordable. We actually have to help people then figure out how to thrive in those spaces and raise their incomes or see their businesses grow in a way that they might not otherwise. And Crescent City didn't attempt to do everything for everybody, but we certainly would work with partners. Propeller, a local business incubator as an organization, helped us with our business clients. Home by Hand is another CDC that helped us get families ready to purchase. And so we had partners. And so the idea of creating affordability, providing stewardship, and working with partners were central to my work at Crescent City. And I left Crescent City now 3 weeks ago to return to the private sector. And I did so in part because I came to the conclusion that the public sector was not going to be the end-all be-all solution to eliminate poverty in our communities. And eliminate poverty is a kind of a crazy concept in a capitalist environment that we always have to be cognizant of, because we will always have relative poverty in our economic system. It requires poverty. Somebody to be at the bottom is just the nature of the beast. Now, granted that group at the bottom might be better off than others in poverty in other places, but they're living here, and they're our family and our friends and our community. And so our job, back to this fairness notion that I mentioned earlier, my simple dream is that African Americans not show up overrepresented in the worst socioeconomic categories. If we could just be proportionate in the various categories, that would be amazing in my book. And the work I'm doing today at Stonehenge Capital is about that, about working with people who don't have access to business capital and helping them grow their businesses. And it's not just capital is a commodity. And so the advice, and back to this idea of stewardship, once again, the perspective that I and my team are able to bring to people's lives, whether it be a single family in a house, renters, or a small business, is what's unique or what's special. And that's where we're adding value. And that's what I'm trying to do today.
Thank you. Thinking about what you all just said, and just introducing yourselves and talking about your work, explaining some of your motivations, several things stood out to me. First is that we have someone representing working now the private sector, then the public sector, as well as academia, as well as religious institution, a church. How do you see the characteristics of those environments shaping what you do and what you even think can be done, or how you talk to other people about what can be done?
Well, I'll jump in. I'm not some rabid capitalist, but I recognize we're in a capitalist environment, and if we're going to play, then let's play to win. And so I have to get up every morning believing there is no limit. The sky is not the limit, that the people we work with can do anything. And my role is to help them get there. There is absolutely a role for nonprofits, government, and other actors. But in this environment, we've got to remember that trying to make a profit and capitalism is what drives our economy. And one of the challenges I experienced in my former life is that I ran into a lot of people who thought their job simply was to transfer subsidy or transfer wealth. And without some other sort of intervention or stewardship, which I think both of these gentlemen can speak to. I certainly heard the pastor talk about building businesses as the need presented itself. And I watched the work of the Bayou District Foundation. The comprehensiveness of their vision or stewardship is impressive.
And just to echo a point, I mean, the work that we do is based off of a public-private partnership. We can't do all the work by ourselves. So we need to bring in the partners and the expertise to to really make this work possible. So I think that's key to what we do is really finding the right people, because believe me, I have limitations all over the place, but what we're good is sourcing out people who really can bring those expertise in and really bring an idea and a goal to fruition to help people.
Yeah, so of course, again, as a person of faith, there's nothing that's impossible. That said, the question is how, right? And so bringing together the necessary resources, whether it's human, whether it's financial, but most importantly, I think it's a will, it's a shared agreement. I mean, think about it. We send people to the moon, right? Poverty alleviation, really, I don't know that's impossible by any stretch of the imagination. There's some stuff that we do just doesn't make sense at all, right? My phone, well, it's not really a phone, it's a computer that I happen to make phone calls on sometimes. Like the power in my hand is so tremendous, and the resources that went into making this thing alone are so tremendous. And so really it does come down to the will, the intent, the desire. So the ability to cast a powerful vision and to mobilize people and to speak their language, right? Everybody's favorite radio station is the same, right? WIIFM, right? What's in it for me? And so as we try to move things forward, is learning to tune into people's radio station. And some people's is they literally want to feel good about themselves because they help somebody else. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm a fan, right? But mobilizing people and resources and a shared vision and a commitment, the will to see transformation take place. That's hugely important. And I think that's the possibility that if I don't have that, I don't know, how does one live without a sense of hope and a sense of positivity that your work matters and that you can make a difference in the world. And so obviously we wouldn't be having this conversation, this conference wouldn't even be on, right? The fact of the matter is that I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on a different time zone than you, which I just found out an hour ago. And you all are in another state and we're having a conversation. You can hear me, see me. It's just unbelievable. So the capacity to address these issues is there. The question becomes, is there the will corporately to be a benefit to our fellow human beings?
What do you do when the will might not be there? I think that's my real question. How do you continue the work when you might have opposition from any type of opponent? It could be corporate, it could be individual. How do you continue that type of work?
I'm happy to jump in on this one. Really first is making space to hear their points first and foremost, because you never know where people are coming from. But B, also being prepared with data, frankly, and what sort of drives a lot of what we do is really the numbers and sense of everything, and really showing the effects that our work has done and what it will be doing. So data drives a lot of, actually, I'd say 80-90% of what we do is really looking at data, quantitative and qualitative, and really having that shape what we want.
If there's no resistance, there's no fun, right? That's what makes a game, that's what makes football, right? There's somebody else that wants something different than you do. And it's banging heads with that person that that's the joy, the adrenaline. That's what excitement is, right? The growth. And so you expect enemies, you expect conflict. That's necessary. But again, we get one spin on the globe. You get one spin and you don't know when you're done spinning. And so the point is to maximize, this is my perspective, to maximize our life, to find something that matters to us, that is important to change and to bring benefit. And as it relates to children, which is the lens through which I look up a lot of things, do we say, what would I do, assuming that these were my children, right? Nobody says their kid is ugly. Nobody says their kid is dumb, right? My kid just learns differently. Now, other people's kid might be dumb. Your children just learn differently, right? And so if we bring the lens that these are our children, this is my community, what do I want for them, right? The golden rule, if I want for others what I want for myself, and that becomes the energy and the effort of our laborers, I think we'll see a lot more success perhaps than we do otherwise. And I think you have to be willing to ask hard questions and to perhaps go against the status quo, right? In communities like ours, we talk about gentrification. My community, gentrification is really not the issue, it's slumlords. And we have tax policy, right? Because tax policy is designed to incentivize behavior, right? So the reason our tax policies give people deductions for building low-income housing is because the government says we're not good at that. We want to incentivize other people to do that through tax incentives. We also recognize that the incentive to maintain those properties, that's a whole nother issue. So in our community, gentrification is not it, it's slumlords, right? We recently had a gentleman who lives in Long Island. I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Company's in Long Island, he owns 125 units. The 125 units, HUD finally does an evaluation. The score goes from 100, which is perfect, 0, which is horrific. The average score on these 125 units was, any guesses? Yeah, a 9. And meanwhile, the rents are $109,000 per month. And so affordable housing is present, but again, the way our tax policy is set up and the absence of enforcement and allowing this person who lives nowhere near this city to make $109,000 a month for years. You see, that's the problem. Or when we talk about eliminating the race gap in wealth, the math won't let that work. We should have that conversation, right? Because the 8th wonder of the world, which everybody knows is what? Compound interest. The 8th wonder of the world will not allow the race gap in wealth to be eliminated because for 246 years, Black people in America worked unremunerated. So if I have a 246-year head start to build a business and I don't have to pay labor, which is my greatest expense, you can't eliminate that wealth gap. We can talk about eliminating income gaps and so on and so on. So we need to have conversations based in reality, based in, as my friend said here, Jacob said, based in the empirical reality. So can we improve the conditions for poor people, for Black people? Absolutely. No question about that. But when we talk about disparities and eliminate the wealth gap, for example, in particular, the math just won't work. You can't do that. But we need to be focused on our conversation, right? What are we talking about doing? Focus those energy and efforts in that space. And then X to Y by when, right? 4 disciplines of execution, OKRs, objectives, key results, right? Focused energy with explicit goals and get about the business of doing the work.
I do think there was a question in the chat. What happens when we run into opposition was also the question from Karen. And when I run into opposition, I try and try again. And eventually I pivot to the people who are responding to what I'm saying, and we work together and we go forward and we succeed. I think there is an endless demand for the kind of services and opportunities that all 3 of us represent, and the sort of services and opportunities that are out there in our city and in our society. I do believe that, when I look at, say, for instance, a soft second mortgage as a subsidy, I don't just think of it as such. I look at that and I say 40 acres and a mule reparations, and finding any one of us individually. There are programs, there are initiatives, there are avenues that are meant to support and assist large numbers of people. They're there, and they're not big enough to support all people. And I agree with John Wallace's comment about focusing on children. I've spent many years looking at early childhood education, working in the area as a volunteer, and a program like Head Start is impossible to beat. And I'm so excited that our city is seeking ways to fully fund early childhood education as a path out of poverty and towards some version of fairness and equity in our society. But back to these programs that are generally targeting adults and families, there are many of them. They're not perfect. They don't serve enough people, but they are there. And once they are there, the there is an opportunity, I think, to start to address some of the multi-generational poverty that we see in our community. And again, that's where organizations, interventions like the three of us represent, like this conversation that we're having, the symposium represents, where we can help people change their lives. There's some comparisons that I hate, and I'm not even going to go down the path, but everybody, there's a lot of opportunity out there. And I think there are many people and organizations who want to work with folks and build community. And those are all avenues toward eliminating poverty and creating multi-generational wealth.
Thank you. One thing that also stood out looking at the chat, where people have talked about slumlords in this city in New Orleans. I was thinking about how we have someone in Pittsburgh and two people in New Orleans, and both are very storied cities with very unique but potentially similar histories related to Black people in the US, both culturally speaking, as well as just experiences. How do you think the character of the cities in which we're in shapes or drives the work that you all are doing? What is it about New Orleans? What is it about Pittsburgh that informs your goals and what you're doing?
So in between 1979 and 1983, 85, Pittsburgh lost 150,000 jobs. We were I believe the 9th or 12th largest city in the country. We built much of the world, particularly late 1800s, early 19s. And when we lost all of those jobs, a lot of people left with those jobs. And in many ways, some of your most, let's say, aggressive folks, when opportunity leaves, they leave. Others get left behind. And it's interesting, we have a tremendous commitment to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And upon reflection, and Steelers fans out there, go Steelers Nation. Upon reflection, it was during the late 70s when the dynasty began, the Iron Curtain and so on. And so in some ways, sports, football, baseball, we won the World Series. Sports actually saved Pittsburgh in that sense, that it brought the city together in the midst of its pain and its misery. And so even today, sports is a defining factor and a source of hope and effort and energy for our city. But at the same time, we have the issues that when all of those folks left, and Black people, of course, were already behind, and those who were left are even further behind. And when you couple that with racial residential segregation, the reason we have what we have, and then there was with, of course, what happened, the late 50s and the so-called urban renewal destroyed the Lower Hill District, which was a very famous Black community in Pittsburgh. The African Americans who were, the communities in which they were able to live, one of them was the receiving neighborhood, which was Homewood. And so that neighborhood became, and is today, still, we're about 90%, 94% African American and disproportionately poor. And so these communities and neighborhoods were created that way. They were not by accident, right? And even today, the most affluent African Americans in this country cannot, quote unquote, gentrify a neighborhood because when African Americans, just by their appearance, when they show up, they suppress property values. Well, I live on a cul-de-sac. There are 9 houses, 3 of them occupied by African Americans. There's my wife, who has 4 degrees. I have 3. My neighbors across the street, both of them are PhDs. Up the street, we have a principal with a doctorate, and her husband's an attorney. And if we're out on Saturday afternoon in our hoodies or whatever we're doing and mowing our lawn and doing whatever we do, if you're looking for a house, matter of fact, there was a house up the street for sale not too long ago. If you come and you see these Black people and their children outside, that's going to shape the way you think about real estate and the value of those properties. And the data confirm that. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen these recent situations where home values are differentially appraised to the tune of $100,000 or more dollars, simply based on the fact that it's occupied by an African American, right? And so the realities of racial residential segregation, irrespective of income, educational attainment, so forth and so on, right? Those are the realities of race in America that continue to exist in 2022. And so we have to wrestle with this question of, do we need to be in integrated communities to experience wealth? The truth of the matter is, a home as a wealth creation strategy is not the same for Black people and white people in America in 2022. You got to have a place to live, and I'm very much pro home ownership. But to say that this is going to be your primary source of wealth, and when you die, it's going to be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars more. My grandparents bought their house in Homewood in 1956, and they paid about $12,000 for that house. The mean home sale value in our community just 2 or 3 years ago was about $14,000. 1956, 65 years ago, and that house is theoretically worth $2,000 or $3,000 more. What happened to this is the investment, you're gonna make all this money? It's not true for Black people in the United States of America in 2022. So we have to think about these issues and be honest and look at the data and make decisions that are informed by the data, rather than just sort of this mythology around how the world works, because it doesn't work exactly the same for African Americans. We should invest in rental properties in white neighborhoods if you're trying to create wealth with real estate as a Black person. And you might need to get somebody white to go and purchase the property on your behalf. I'm just saying.
Wealth creation really doesn't happen, for a family. Yes, the house is the greatest asset, but if you're trying to get wealthy or rich in America, then it's small business, and which then becomes big business. And I acknowledge what you say, John Wallace. I cannot do anything about the color of my own skin or about the color of anybody else's skin. Can't be mitigated, can't change the various things that are a consequence of that. But the work that I think we're all doing is trying to solve around the color of someone's skin. And I had that's the job. That's the reality I feel like I live with. There is no, no playing with that. And so what can I do to assist people of color and women grow their family wealth is always the thought that leads in my head when I start working. But yeah, can't solve. So one of the solutions, how do we get rid of the race problem, if you want to call it that? One of the arguments I've heard is the people of color have to be wealthier. And, that kind of logic makes sense in this economic system that we live in. I don't know if it's true, but it's at least something to work towards. And that's sort of what I'm working towards, is that hope, that desire that helping people of color and women become wealthier will one day result in people being seen in some fairer or more equitable way.
So just to piggyback off what Julius just said about small business creation and is a way to wealth, and we look at it as a little bit in that frame recently, more recently. Just to give some context, I didn't do it justice in the beginning, but Columbia Park is 685 units of mixed income housing. It's a third public, it's a third low income tax credit, third market rate. The center community is an early Head Start program called Educare, which is pretty much Head Start on steroids, thanks to some philanthropy. And then we have a K-8 school next to it. We are looking at the investments that we make and how we can take the community with us, because we took $20 million in philanthropic capital, and it's been leveraged into a 324 million at this point of investment in the area, bringing $12 million in annual salaries and about 300 jobs. When we do small business creation and when we make an investment, we're being talked to, we're actually piloting a digital broadband pilot right now. how can we open up a slice of that equity in that business, if it's going to turn into a business, to the community in a way that those units are going to be rental in perpetuity? But how can we have those people who are renting invest, if they're an unsavvy investor, quote unquote, whoever coined that term, how can they invest into programs that will support the community, but also have a revenue stream that comes off of it when it is expanded and scaled? So it's really something we're really looking into, on how we can sort of grow that aspect of what we do, especially once everything's built on site physically.
Yeah, part of my research actually is in middle-class Black people and our health, and you can't earn your way or educate your way out of racism. It exists. It's a defining feature of our society. So I think really our conversation here about these place-based initiatives that target groups that experience racism is the solution, right? Is to dealing with that. We talked about entrepreneurship, self-employment. One of the things that also stood out was Dr. Wallace, your description of STEAM programs, and you mentioned agriculture. And again, we're in New Orleans here, but the rest of Louisiana can be somewhat agricultural, as well as places in the middle of Pennsylvania. I grew up in North Carolina, where there's a lot of ruralness in agriculture. How do you see things like agriculture, or just connection to land in everybody's work as a factor?
Yeah, I mean, ownership is key. So whether it's in a low-income Black neighborhood or wherever, I think the issue of owning something changes people's perspective. Even entrepreneurship, right? When you teach people the connection between their inputs and their outcomes. Simply example, we had a youth entrepreneurship program, and we charged the kids for overhead for the utilities, right? So they use our space. Like, fine, we charge you for the use of the space. So we're teaching the kids about fixed costs. So we came in the building, and the room was dark, and I'm like, what's going on? They turned the lights out, right? They understood the relationship between their behavior and their fixed costs. And so people who are taught to think entrepreneurially, I mean, I would love, if you're hiring people, having people who think like, and perhaps even better, are entrepreneurs, are the best employees in the world, because they think differently. They behave differently. When people own things, they treat them differently. And so moving, and again, I'm a fan of ownership. Rental property is fine on the ownership side, but living in rented spaces is very different than when you own the property yourself. And so I think we have to think about ownership. The challenge is we know what happened with our communities, right? You had white flight, then you had Black middle class flight. So the solution is, even if should Black middle class people move to predominantly Black communities and lift those communities, right? We have all of these beliefs, and we read about, we read E. Franklin Frazier and St. Clair Drake and Du Bois, and we talk about all these neighborhoods that were wonderful and all these Black people live together and so forth and so on. Is the solution for middle-class Black people to move to Black neighborhoods?
Well, that's I just started watching the reboot of the Wonder Years, and that's kind of the premise of the program is when neighborhoods were integrated, they were stronger, Black neighborhoods. And I'm sure—
You said integrated or segregated?
Well, when they were segregated, economically integrated, there were middle-class Black people, there were wealthier Black people, there were lower income Black people all living in one community. And that made it, the overview at the beginning of the program strongly implies that was a better environment when they were mixed incomes in one neighborhood. Charles Blow's latest book, The Devil You Know, argues a version of what you're talking about, Mr. Wallace, Professor Wallace, with in encouraging African Americans to return to those states in the South where we are close to the majority, and gaining political power, which could lead to increased economic power. and can therefore lead to more fairness and equity in our communities. And so I don't at all think that is the craziest idea. Implementation, how to make it happen, those are other questions, but I don't think, the extension of what you just said, which is what Mr. Blow says, argues, is a path. It is an idea. It could be an experiment to try to address some of the issues that we are talking about. Someone in the chat, I don't know if it was a typo or they were paraphrasing, but they mentioned a village raising a child or rising a child, and that gets back to community and building strong communities and efforts like what Columbia Park is trying to do, and those mythical communities you kind of mentioned that used to exist, or we say they existed. I don't know. I wasn't there.
Since you mentioned the chat and the Q&A box, if anybody has any questions that they would like to pose to the panelists, we're going to get to those, so you can put those either in the chat or in the Q&A box. What I wanted to move on to is policy change. What do you see in that realm? Things like tax incentives were mentioned, and you were sort of talking about how to navigate those systems and incentivize, but broadly speaking, what do you see needs to be done?
One of the things I was trying to do and still try to do is create more opportunities for ownership. So right now, if we think of affordable housing as a path, just the very beginning of a path out of poverty, then the paradigm, there are really only two forms. You have a low-income housing tax credit apartment or a low-income apartment, or you have a home that you purchase with a soft second mortgage, and you have to qualify for either programs. But there are a whole world of other options and other paths towards ownership that are in between. And I worked for a community land trust, so I think about the community land trust single-family home. I think about condos. I think about co-ops and things of this nature, which are more common on the West Coast and on the East Coast and in some of our denser cities in the Midwest. And so creating one policy opportunity is just to create more options for people to own and more forms of affordability that cater to a wider group of people, so that we're not targeting narrow segments. One of the challenges that middle income, a package of challenges that middle income people face, particularly middle income African Americans, is there are no subsidies for people in the middle. There are you get some benefit for being married if that's a middle class thing, or you get some benefit for owning a home. But outside of the people who get lots of the redistribution of tax dollars, of redistribution of wealth, are people who make very little money and people who make lots of money. And so policies that in general target middle income people, incentives for small landlords, incentives for small business operators, more programs of that sort would be an opportunity. And in my work at Crescent City, we incubated small businesses in the same way that Professor Wallace is talking about his organization doing, in the same way that it sounds like the Bayou District Foundation would like to figure it out. I would add an asterisk or a caveat is, as you all think about that at the Bayou District Foundation, make sure to cast a wide net. One of the challenges in New Orleans is always rewarding the same group of entrepreneurs and the same group of relatively wealthy or people with access. And we have to get outside of that if we really want to see broad wealth creation and distribution in our community.
No, correct. We mainly looking at our community members, frankly, to really see what you can do when looking at that is really how can we build up the folks in and around our community that have been there for years and are great people who just didn't know or were never given the opportunity to I mean, you go to policy and you look at what policies that could be expanded. I'm a firm believer in that soft second, if that could come back, I mean, and really push that for home ownership and expanding it up into a little bit of a higher middle class range, because you look at people making great money, having great jobs, but affording a home around Columbia Park. I mean, the price points around there have increased substantially over the last 3 to 5 years, and it's pricing out people who want to own homes, and it's a terrible thing. It's how can we make sure people in the community stay in the community and really benefit from the success of the community.
Yeah, it's hugely important that people understand money. And we're talking about basic math, right? Addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and Excel, right? The fundamentals of money, income statements, balance sheets. Hugely important that people understand. Again, tax policy, the incentives are built in. So either we operate with those incentives or we operate against them. But the incentives are there to get people to do specific kinds of things. And so wealth creation in my entrepreneurship work, you know, the most difficult thing is getting people to understand those expenses, fixed expenses, your variable expenses, and understand you have to pay yourself, right? Oftentimes the entrepreneurs with whom I work, they want to be social workers too, right? And so you want to hire your brother who just got out of prison, who is like, you know, a known thief. You got to fire your brother if he steals. It's just that simple. You got to explain to your mama that you're going to fire your brother. Right? There's all sorts of things, and you have to have a will. We have in our community people literally, one of the organizations I work with, we had to get 25 signatures to untangle a title, because when Big Mama dies and she's told you she's leaving you the house and all that, the bank doesn't care what large mother said if it's not written down. You see what I'm saying? Then everybody in the house, literally the whole family owns that home. So getting clear title on that home requires the signature of every one of those family members, right? So there are macro structural stuff and there's intrafamilial stuff that you have to let people know your quote unquote business, so that your business can move forward after you're gone, and that we understand how to manage money and build businesses and use the existing policies to advantage the community. And the difference between wealth and income is huge, right? My income is fine, but I'm also supporting my family members. You know, the wealth doesn't go from I asked mom or dad for $30,000 or $50,000 to start my business. No, I'm helping mom and dad and my cousin and paying tuition for my brother. You see what I'm saying? So wealth and income are hugely different. And so understanding money is a critically important part of this work. So whether we're talking about owning a home, starting a business, or whatever, all of that, it still comes down to understanding money and how it works.
John, people are texting me on the side about your delivery. You are certainly keeping people's attention with the large mother as an example. One of my taglines in my work is that my job is to help people become better capitalists. And I hope that that is consistent with what you're saying about the language of business and the process of business. I get nervous when I hear people say that understanding, I don't, again, I'm not some huge capitalist, but I do think there is something to it. You know, as a way of as a means of social organization, I think there's something to it. And if we're going to do it, then we should try to win. I also think it's a bit instinctive. I also think it's a bit, it does have some reference to human nature, capitalism, meaning that I think for many of us, you know, just living in America, it's kind of natural. And so I get nervous when I have conversations with people who, with situations where it's questioned whether or not low to moderate income people understand the basic hustle of living in our country. But I do think there is a lot of opportunity to do stewardship and put more formal opportunities in place for people to engage with our economic system, our government system, and do better at it. That thing you talked about with around title, to me, that's a part of the wealth transfer process in our communities, in our countries. And just because we give someone a housing subsidy doesn't mean that they know 5 years later how to renovate that house and maintain the value. Nor does it mean 20 years later that they understand how to use the equity in the home to send the child to college or to start a small business without selling the home. And on the public policy front, if we subsidize somebody and the city knows everybody that they subsidized, well, why not? And again, any academic who studies these things would know that most low to moderate income homes, the income tops out somewhere in the 30s and the 40s of the household. And so as taxes rise, it makes no sense for the government. I recognize the different parts of the city are different political entities, but government makes no sense for government to take someone's home because they can no longer afford their taxes when we subsidize them on the front end. And so why not have tax policy that unifies and freezes the taxes on the affordable dweller that we know is going to be topped out in terms of their income. Their income is not going to keep on going up like it will for many people on this call throughout one's life. That's all stewardship in my book. Those are the kind of things that we need more of, coupled with the wealth transfer that we do through some of these subsidy programs.
So you should think you're talking logically, and you use government in the same sentence.
I know you're joking, but the role of government is to be the equalizer, or I read that someplace, to create a level playing field. I do disagree with one thing that John said earlier. What did he say earlier about government? And I can't remember now, but it was something about government and taxes. And anyway, I'll come back to it. I'm having
My point was the tax policy is used to incentivize behavior.
Yeah, and I'm having a 50-year-old moment. I'm sorry. I had COVID about 4 weeks ago too, so I'm still recovering.
Well, I think that this is a good place to open it up for Q&A. We have several questions that have been sent to us, as well as topics that are being discussed in the chat right now. I'm going to actually build off of what we have been discussing with a very direct question. It's directed to Dr. Wallace, but I think other people could answer. Do you think that we as Black people, and I guess referring to Black people, should invest in businesses rather than in homes?
No, I would never say a rather than. I think we should invest in all things. And the key word being invest, right? The idea is that one puts money in assets. Those things are designed to bring a return, and those things that do not plummet in value at the moment that they're purchased. So I'm a huge fan of whether it's real estate. Just be clear on what you're buying it for, right? Your home is your home. You need to live there. You need to enjoy it. It's a place to have Thanksgiving dinner with your family, watch TV, play video game, whatever you want to do. Your home is your home. Don't confuse your home with an investment, because it may not, in fact, be, it's an investment, but not a financial one. Let's do it like that. If you're buying real estate for investment purposes, your home should not be your primary strategy to create wealth from from an income perspective. At least for Black people in America, the data don't bear out necessarily that your home is going to give you a huge return, at least not the same rate of return that the whites get in America. So you should buy a home, absolutely. But you should also build businesses, and you should get an education, work the absolute best job that you can. And we have a long history of working multiple jobs as well, right? But building businesses and equipping our families to see ourselves as entrepreneurs and contributors, and the ability that we have the ability in our hands. So when my grandfather was told that you cannot be a supervisor here by his foreman because he was Black, that did not keep him from being an electrician, a plumber, a mason, and from building stuff and doing other things to care for and provide for his family. And so, this gig economy is cool now because other people are doing stuff. But the truth of the matter is we've always lived in the gig economy. We've always had to do what we had to do to take care and provide for our families. And the key is to engage the entire family in this wealth creation activity. And you realize that you're gifted, you have the ability, you have talent. Think about 246 years of unremunerated labor, another 100 years of Jim Crow, and where we find ourselves today. It's just amazing how much progress Black people in America have made because of our willingness to work hard, to do what we need to do, take care of our family and our communities. So it's more about the mindset and returning perhaps to where we've come from to continue. So buy a house, absolutely. If it increases in value, fantastic. But at minimum, you had a wonderful place for your family and somebody couldn't just raise the rents willy-nilly on you because they chose to.
Any other responses from our panelists?
Could you repeat the question, please, Karen? Could you repeat?
I deleted the question, but I think it was about should Black people invest in business rather than.
It's not an either. It's not an either or. That's kind of a that's kind of a false dichotomy, right? Because the reality is only so many of us have the talent, drive, or desire or risk tolerance to get into small business. The majority of us want a job. I want a job, right? My brother, my father, I come from a family of entrepreneurs, and I'm only just starting to think that way or think about it, the risk. I've thought about the opportunity many times, but the reality is that most of us want to work for somebody else, and that's okay. We just need more structures and supports around us to be effective at it. I remember now, by the way, what it was, the social worker thing you were saying, Professor Wallace, about when we get in business and hiring one another and when you need to fire people and that kind of thing. I dig that. I understand the discipline you're talking about. I also recognize that often we're dealing with symptoms of racism in our lives, that brother can't get a job elsewhere because he or she has a record. The trucking company or the bus company, the school bus company that my relative sets up has difficulty breaking into the market. Or, even more simple, and I've had this problem personally, being a Black person with a college degree and being unable to find a job in your city, in New Orleans, because I don't have access to enough. There aren't enough opportunities, particularly as you go higher up in the food chain. There just aren't that many jobs in New Orleans, let alone jobs that where a white person with a college degree is not already in line to get that job first, because there just aren't that many jobs for someone with a college degree, period. That's a real issue. A lot of that can be a symptom of racism. The need to play social worker, and I am all for social workers. Again, that's just another word for stewardship or intervention in my book. We have to do that. I look at Black banks, similar problem with Black banks. My former boss said when he started, there were 100 Black banks in 1960, and today there are 20. And my perception of Black banks is either they err on the side of trying to do too much for community and don't manage their risk profile enough, or they're too conservative and they're not taking enough risk on behalf of their community. And this is all, of course, remembering that they're regulated entities and not small business investment entities.
Yeah.
I need to let the record show I'm a professor in a school of social work. I have social workers in my family. I'm a fan of social work. Just don't confuse your business with a social service agency. That's my point. If you're doing business, you have to be in business, because at the end of the day, if your business fails, then all of those people you're employing, those mortgages that you're helping to pay for, all of that, it goes up in smoke. So you just need to be clear about what you're doing. That's all I was saying. So I'm a huge social work fan.
Understood. I noted that. I said the discipline you're talking about is required. But the other half of how we get here in 2022 is, besides the hard work you talked about, is also compassion and tolerance for one another, because it has been.
Oh, absolutely. But see, here's the thing. You take your profit and you do what you want with it. So if you want to give it away, whatever, that's the beautiful part. You do what you want with the money that you earn, and absolutely we continue to help our families, so on and so on. I was just talking about who you hire and being thoughtful about that and being clear on the purpose of your business. If it's to hire your brother, fantastic, hire your brother. Don't be disappointed when he does what he does.
We have another question actually about entrepreneurship. It's a bit more pointed. How do you suggest supporting business accelerators / entrepreneurship incubators, going back to the idea of the place-based initiative? How do you suggest supporting them in casting a wider net, quote unquote, to invest in sole proprietors, businesses, that are not fully equipped to achieve or access high growth and scalability.
So we have we have a real world example, right? We have two real world examples. One I'm clear about, Columbia Park might be the second as they try to do what they're doing, and I'll defer in a moment, but Propeller, my personal observation of Propeller is that it started off helping people who probably would have gotten there on their own anyway. And as it has evolved over time, it has developed a number of different programs like their Broad Street initiative, where they go up and down Broad Street and they try to figure out how to help some of those proprietors on Broad Street. As the nonprofit Broad Community Connections has strengthened Broad Street and tried to help it grow and prosper, gentrification has happened. And Propeller is helping other entrepreneurs along Broad Street figure out how to grow their business and stay. And I think Propeller has done a great job that some of the other publicly funded incubator types could look at and say, hey, who are we helping? Do they really need help? And we got to, be honest with ourselves. Not everybody is going to have a tech or engineering-based agenda. There is still a world for janitorial companies. There's still a world for real estate development companies. There's a world for bars and restaurants. And not every incubator and accelerator can just focus on the high growth opportunities. I think there are a number that do that, and they're looking for people of color to showcase because they have so few on a relative basis. But I think Propeller does a great job of, in one of its programs, of focusing on more traditional, lower growth businesses. And I think it's an example others should look at.
No, we really look at sort of the community first, going up and scaling from there. Many of the most creative people and the most dynamic people I know I've met in the community, and giving those people some guidance and connecting them to folks who the foundation knows, or getting them enrolled in places like Propeller, and connecting them with that allows them to really flourish their ideas and move forward. It's really, if I had an unlimited budget, I would be redeveloping St. Bernard Avenue, and there would be a host of local businesses on it. I mean, literally across the street from Columbia Park, there's Commercial Blight. That would be perfect. And the businesses are in the community. We actually ran into the problem with community businesses getting too, just organically getting too big. And now that coffee shop that was on the corner is now on St. Claude Avenue. I'm super stoked for them with their success, but what could we have done to keep them in the neighborhood and really have that business grow in the neighborhood and become a stalwart there? Same thing with, there was a vegan food restaurant down the street from Columbia Park. Now they're out right off Airline Highway. They do great work, but they grew too big and we had no place to physically put them. Fantastic business. It's finding those opportunities and really letting those people go for it.
We have 2 minutes left and a very large question to answer. So I'm going to try to break it down and hopefully allow for a very quick answer. So we've mentioned capitalism various times. This person asked about how Black people would want to be a part of capitalism when that's the same system that has used Black people for our labor. How can people invest in their community with this unequal distribution in the economy? I think maybe just responding to that statement and question might be a way to end.
I don't see any of us talking about revolution in any kind of an active way. And so short of undermining or overthrowing our economic system, I don't know that we have and we don't want to go to jail, right? Those are the kind of prison, right? So the outcomes of opposing our economic system are prison or fighting a revolution. Maybe the third option is to not have anything and to suffer and be in poverty, I guess. And if those are the options, you know, my revolution, if I ever had any revolutionary days, they are past.
Yeah, I think we have the system that we have, and the system could be, again, it still comes down to the people in the system. And when we look at the alternatives, I don't know that there is any of these systems that is not occupied by people and that pervert it for their own well-being, right? So I think ultimately, within the parameters of the system in which we operate, there's tremendous opportunity to create wealth, as we see. But everybody's not going to be a millionaire, billionaire. There's a young woman who my wife works with. She takes people's hair down, right? You got braids. She literally comes to your house and takes out the extensions for $60 for hour and a half worth of work. That is a wonderful little business that adds significant income to her household and her family every month. I'm a fan. And there are opportunities like that all over the place. The creativity of people who have little is unbelievable. And that's how we got here today, despite the challenges. So 1,000 flowers bloom. Everybody's not going to build the next tech company, and that's fine. They don't need to. But a few extra dollars in your house to take care of your family and be able to go on vacation once in a while and take care of repairs on the car, that's beautiful stuff. It should be encouraged. We should teach people income statements, balance sheets, fixed costs, variable costs.
Look, you can keep going. I mean, like, keep going. I'm all for it. No, I mean, it does. I do think the system does present opportunity. It's and that opportunity can be taken by anyone in large scale or small scale, and can be used to help people as well. So that's what I think there is.
Okay, well, thank you. A comment in our chat says change starts with us, and I appreciate you all for being here and for all of the work that you do. And with that, we're going to take a break and continue forward. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a great rest of your day.